the full frame zoom in and or zoom out transition. Oh boy, this is a big one. So, here's the lamest possible version of this transition. The Premiere default cross zoom. I'd call this a zoom in and out. Lame. I was amused to discover that I used to use this transition non-ironically. What was I thinking? You know what? It's fine. There's a certain charm and enthusiasm to it. BCC plus cross zoom dissolve. Yeah, it's definitely better looking than the stock Premiere transition, but it's still not great. This is still a below average transition that I would basically never use. It's another tattoo parlor equivalent of just give me a tattoo. How about the Mr. Horse zooms? By the way, these are free. Here's the zoom in. Now that's different. It's just a zoom in. Here's another, which is just a zoom out. These are far better and more useful than the cross zoom. You can even adjust the timing however you want, and it still looks good. But remember, because this is a bunch o' layers transition, there is still a hard cut in the middle of all that motion. Sometimes that's fine, but I prefer having some kind of overlap. For that, I'll use the Film Impact Zoom Blur. I can change the center, the direction, and extent of the zoom, and the blur, chromatic aberration, and vertigo, which is basically lens distortion. Though, surprisingly, there are no controls for the ease or cross dissolve. You can see that clip B gradually dissolves in at the appropriate time, rather than cutting in like in the Mr. Horse zoom. So you might think that you can just add a sneaky cross dissolve underneath the Mr. Horse zoom to achieve the same thing, but that doesn't work no matter what you try. Just leave it as a cut. A great use for a full frame zoom in or zoom out transition like this is to show that one thing is inside of another thing. So we're moving through space, kind of like the push transition, but instead of left, right, up, or down, we are moving forward or backward. Here, I used a zoom in transition on a still photo to enter the world of my office. I think that worked really well. Here, Captain Disillusion uses a zoom in transition to get us inside of this scale model DeLorean. Notice that the angle of the camera technically is different, but it's actually not jarring or confusing. The zoom-in transition doesn't need to be completely literal. Also, I just noticed that he then does a zoom-in and then zoom-out transition, which works really well. Here, I use a zoom out to show that these small modules are what make up the surface of a Jumbotron. Here, I used a zoom out to go from microcode to a CPU die, even though that's not exactly literal, then another zoom out to the silicon wafer. I also added some skew to that one to match the angle of the wafer. That's fun. This was actually Film Impact's motion camera transition, which I'll talk about later. I've also used zooms as much less literal transitions, but when I do this, I usually use them only on the head or the tail of a clip, not between two clips. Here, I do a head zoom-in transition to go to a website, and again to go to the next website, with the center of the zoom being the center of where I want the viewer to look, which is reinforced by the slow zoom-in Ken Burns effect on this clip. And both of those are okay. I could have used some other transition like a flash or a soft edge wipe or a blur stretch, and those would have also been fine. Sometimes it just doesn't matter. This next example is actually a pop-in transition, which is super useful, but we'll talk about it later. Then I transitioned this box out by using a pull transition, P-U-L-L. It kind of looks like a zoom in or out transition, but it goes from the center of the object instead of the center of the frame. Now it's time to talk some more about frame edges. Long story short, any and all Premiere transitions can only work with the frame that you give them. That's everything contained inside the boundaries of the program monitor. That's fine for some transitions, like wipes, but if you're doing a single zoom-in transition and you don't do anything fancy, it'll end up looking like this. See the problem? Clip A is fine, but for clip B, which has to start out being smaller than the frame, we can easily see those hard edges, and they don't look very good. We could try to solve this by feathering the edge. That's better, but still not ideal. If only we had more image information about what's out here, beyond the edges of the program monitor. But we don't. Even if you have a larger video that you've scaled up, so that technically there is extra image information beyond the edge of the program monitor, no transition in Premiere is able to use that information. This includes all third-party transitions, which includes all true transitions and Buncho layer transitions. If a transition can only use what's inside the program monitor, how can it fill in this detail? Well, it could take the edge pixels and extend them forever, but that almost never looks good. It sometimes works for website screenshots. What if we repeat the image, like on a grid? This is better, but we'll probably still be able to see those hard edges unless the video is very uniform in all directions, which is unlikely. So what if we repeat the image but mirror it so that we know there won't be a hard edge? This is almost always the best way to do it. Then add some radial motion blur on top of that to disguise the mirror trick. That's great. And maybe a teaspoon of chromatic aberration, a pinch of lens distortion, a smidgen of exposure, and you've got yourself a fantastic looking zoom transition. Now, the best transitions allow you to customize everything I just talked about and more, like the zoom center and zoom amount. I already explained the film impact zoom blur, which does all of that stuff, and I will explain the motion camera in the dedicated film impact chapter near the end. It's amazing. The BCC plus crash zoom dissolve has some parameters that film impact's zoom blur doesn't. It's got spin, easing in, out, and center, dissolve duration, plus some weird stuff like smear offset, which I would never use. Also, it has the usual GUI, which I love. Unfortunately, we've got some problems. If you want a longer zoom transition, you'll notice this bizarre lurch in the motion in the very middle of the transition. You might think that you can change the ease middle parameter to fix it, but nope, that does not work. The only real way to avoid this is to turn on Boost Motion Blur. It certainly looks a lot better now, especially if you don't use such a long transition. But the lurch is still visible if you look closely. Also, wait a minute. It's my old nemesis, the resolution reduction problem. Why? Boris FX, I know you're better than this. Hopefully they'll fix these issues after seeing this video. Remember, when applying your zoom transitions, the viewer should not really be able to see any detail or repeating patterns in the mirrored images. To obscure that, a good transition will use motion blur, and a well-timed built-in dissolve or soft edge iris wipe between the two clips. The absolute worst zoom transitions will happily reveal a sort of kaleidoscope pattern, like this one from a terrible AI video that I generated. NewBlue has something called zoom, but it's actually just a traveling zoom blur. You can center it, but there's nothing you can do to make it actually move in or out. It's just a blur. Maxon Universe's version of this is called uni.warp, and although it's not as good as the ones from Film Impact and Boris FX, it's actually one of the better universe transitions. But I already wrote about it in their dedicated chapter near the end, and I don't want to copy-paste, so you can learn about it in that chapter. I really don't think it's worth making this one yourself, but if you must, you'll need to use the transform effect. It's the only way to get a zoom blur that I know of. Just turn the shutter angle all the way up, pick your anchor point, and animate the scale parameter. Alternatively, you can import stuff into After Effects and parent it all to a null object and animate the opacity to transition from one to the other. But then you'll also need to mirror the edges, and this is just way too much manual work to have to do every single time. Chengda is another free source for this transition. I used these ages ago, but today I realize that there's a major problem with them. They look quite similar to the Mr. Horse zoom, but if you look closelier, you'll see the problem. And I'm not talking about these annoying lines over here. though we can fix it with the alpha adjust effect. The Chengda zoom transitions cut your resolution in half. This is fine when there's a bunch of motion blur all over the screen, but it's terrible at the very beginning or end of the transition. This happens because to get those mirrored edges, this transition uses a 50% scale transform effect, which decreases the video's resolution, then adds the mirrors, and then uses a 200% scale transform effect to zoom everything back in. Again, this decreased resolution thing is the most common problem with Bunch-O layer transitions. To be fair, I believe Chengda has fixed this problem in his most recent transition packs, but the workaround requires that you put in extra manual work to nest and duplicate your clips and use different presets on each one. Also, as stated, Mr. Horse largely does not have this problem. I'll explain their unique solution later in their own dedicated chapter. How fast should it be? Although this is conceptually similar to the push, I almost never make the zoom go that fast. This particular zoom transition is 12 frames, and it actually feels just right to me. But in general, longer zoom transitions can definitely work. Usually I wouldn't go longer than 1 second. Always remember, your viewers can't really see anything useful during a transition like this, especially with all the necessary motion blur. As for sound effects, you can once again use whooshes, because we're simulating the movement of the camera. And again, I think the big sounding whooshes are better. Just don't make them too loud. You just watched one chapter from a longer transitions tutorial, which you can also watch right now for free from the link below, or just click this little thingy on screen right now. The tutorial covers nearly every useful transition and every transitions vendor. I'll see you there.